Okay, folks, I think I'm on. So here we are at my first Zoom presentation. And thank you, Bodhi, and the Anthracite Heritage Groups welcoming of me. I'm very grateful to be here, and I appreciate the introduction because that helps to explain
Okay,
how I
so
got.
divider wall is painted behind it.
Mhm.
That's cool.
Okay, I'm hearing people talk, but I'm not sure if you can hear me. So I guess I'll just keep talking. I created this book, Reclamation, from coal dust to hope. Here you can see I'm holding a copy, but Bodhi has some film presentation to show you. How did I come to painting? As he mentioned, I started on my 50th birthday. And along the way, I started sharing things on Facebook. And after a couple of years, people said, Bobby, you're painting our childhoods. Please put them in a book. So my first book was called Almost Touching, which the title work is derived from a local poet, Harry Hunes's poem, My Mother at Evening. And then
No, I think
I
he's.
started, hello? I started to create my second book more recently, which is this one, Reclamation from Coal Dust to Hope, because I wanted to go a little earlier than the previous book. And I also wish to add to things later on, things of our current time. And that's what um, and that's why there are things from the past and things looking at the current day, which that led me to the idea that I need to search for hope in what we're doing in this work. See if there's some message we can get from our parents and our grandparents who certainly worked hard here in the coal region. How did they do it? I ask myself that time and again, and I'm sure you do too. How did they manage to survive and still stay happy and optimistic? So I'm going to take you through some images in my story, and I'll share some ideas as we go along. So the first one we're going to move to is called Reclamation, which is the title of the book. If you look at the painting on your screen, you can see it. I took this picture between Shenandoah and Frackville about 2 winters ago, standing on the berm of a road, looking down at a piece of land that had been reclaimed. And in a certain way, you can make it look pretty. And if you look there, I added in some train cars over where some old buildings were still there from a mining industry. Up top, I added a drag line, which my nephew David worked the drag line. And so I had some good pictures and I just inserted it there to elevate it, the scene. And if you look at the sky up top, I'm working with clouds, but then I also start suggesting figures flying over this ground, which appears to be somewhat dilapidated. Now, often when I paint something, afterwards I try to write about it. And often, as you're going to hear, I write prose, like either a prose account or I'll tell you the story. In this case, Reclamation, I needed to write a poem. So let me start with the poem, and it talks about at the very end one of the few things I learned about my grandfather, Patrick Henry McCormick, who came here to America in 1874, which would have been on this past April 1st, 1824, would have been 150 years. So 150 years ago, he arrived here, and you'll see why I'm letting you know that as I read this poem. Reclamation, 2022. Still, still, still. The green grass glows like waving mounds on bouldered fields. The red silch bank atop the yellow paints a pretty picture, ebony borders glistening down the beam. This chore to sweep up a spill, reface a mountain, refill a hill, succeeded to tidy up the mess, almost, of rusted streams and crystal currents turned orange and blue to entice and enchant on sweet summer days. We came, we conquered, we demarcated borders not intended to erect cemented towers of ice and steel, in which we live and die. As dust smothered the breathing, and the light too bright swelled the seas. Drag lines don't drift like Ahab's whale, and metal cranes can't fly as Icarus once tried. We may chew on metal boats and roll them round our hungry mouths till the barren trees ripen, just like Grandpap did before the famine sailed him here to dig the coal and breakfast on onions to give his kids a fuller plate. And now we can turn over to the next piece, which is I call Golgotha in Slate. And this piece resulted in April of 2017. I was fortunate enough to go to hear Julia Wolf's marvelous oratorio called Anthracite Fields. I saw it at the Weiss Center up in Selingsgrove, and then I saw it 2 or 3 times again because they had asked me to come and show some of my work at their events. So this piece I'm going to tell you about from the moment I entered the building up there in Susquehanna. I was enwrapped by the WPA era photography of Jack Delano, while balladeer Jay Smar sang to the pre-show crowd. I sidled over to the wall to take in some photos. As I stared at Delano's black and white shot of a cold patch scene, tears started trickling down my face. Forgot about the mud, I said to myself. Wolf's masterpiece followed, and it swept me away. Afterwards, I picked up 2 CDs. Throughout the next 10 days, as I painted this painting, Golgotha in Slate, I found myself weeping, singing, dancing, listening to the music over and over again as I poured out my love for a grandfather I had never met. Nearing completion, I wanted to uplift my bleak landscape, so I added a figure in the center, carrying a pick like a cross. Look there, dead center of the picture. Look right into the dead center. You'll see a little dark figure going up the hill, and it's a miner carrying his pick. That person represents Patrick and all the immigrants who came from afar here to Pennsylvania to build their lives amid the anthracite fields. Like him, these men seemed destined for a lifetime of sacrifice as America used coal to build its empire. Yet, in spite of the struggle, Pat McCormick and the others likely felt a level of pride to work to feed their families. That's why so many of them traveled to this new world, for the opportunity to work and the freedom to pursue their lives. My life serves as a testament to the credibility of the American dream. Today, 150 years after his arrival, I hope to attest to Patrick's achievement, and his realization reflects those of his brothers in the anthracite fields. These 15 decades have witnessed a colossal number of changes in our world, our country, our communities, our families, and ourselves. As you leaf through these pages, these images of my artwork, open yourself up to one grandson's story of his continuing evolution, growth made possible by the sweat of my forebears. Yes, at times they needed to fight for justice while they carried such dreams, and that forms a part of our nation's ascent. I suspect my journey reflects your journey. As you turn these pages, imagine your ancestors walking through these settings. Not long ago, it happened right here. And if you look at that picture, you'll see breakers around here. I've taken pictures of church up in Frackville, the Russian church. I always liked those domes. They gave you a certain feeling when you entered those communities. And I added another breaker further back because I wanted that to ascend a little bit higher, because there was a constant struggle in my childhood, it seemed, between the workforce and the power of the church and immigrants coming to live and trying to find a place to make a life, and even children. My grandfather, by the way, started working at 12. Uh, how did this all happen? And look, here we are 150 years later. Things change, but a lot of stuff stays the same. Okay, I seem to have lost you, Bodhi.
I'm sorry, Bob. What are you? Is everything
I,
good?
I lost the picture.
Oh, is it there now?
No,
What do you see on the screen?
just says Zoom.
Hmm.
I might have bumped something.
I wonder if someone else could let me know. Oh, okay, thanks. So yeah, it looks like it's. You might have
Here,
to.
Bodie.
I'm sorry.
We have it here.
Okay, yeah, I see it too. So Bob, maybe you did hit something.
I think I hit something. I might have to come back in. Let's see if I can do this.
Okay.
Okay. There we are. Okay, I'm back. So here we are now. That's good, Bodhi. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Now we're going to move on to a scene which is a little bit more fun to talk about. The painting you're looking at in front of you is called Blasting Day. And Blasting Day is derived from photos I had taken after driving around between Ashland and Gerardville up towards Shenandoah. There's some patches, and the one's called Lost Creek. And if I'm probably similar up if you're in the area, where you find old houses sitting along abandoned neighborhoods where they're kind of sinking down into the hillside. So I kind of was playing around with the paint, and I created this scene out of memories of houses that I'm very familiar with, and mountains and things flying through the sky. And that led me to think of Blasting Day and a childhood story. And I think you'll enjoy it. Painted in 2023. You'll notice, by the way, I've used coal in this picture. And in a lot of my paintings, I use granules or sediments from the coal mines. Some of them are yellow and some of them are more reddish orange. In the early 50s, our family had only one car. And at the time, that proved to be more than some. Each day, Dad drove to work at Sam Shoemaker's garage in town, Ashland, leaving Mom at home to tend to the kids. Taking care of the house and her children kept her busy, but at times she must have yearned for adult conversation. She was a smart lady. When her sister Ruth arrived each summer, the sisters surely delighted in one another's company. During such a visit, my sister Ginny and I felt equally elated because we got to spend time with our cousins, Johnny and Joanne Brennan. One sunny day while we were playing out back, we heard loud booms and saw rocks, coal flying right through the clear blue sky. Managing to dodge them, we rushed into the house to tell Mom, "Mom, they're blasting rocks and coal flying right through the air. Help, what are we gonna do?" Sitting on the living room sofa with Aunt Ruth, and I can see them here, their two knees together, Mom waved us off. "Oh, honey, just play out front. They won't hit you out there." Huh? A little disheartened. We did what she told us to do and moved our game out front. A local scholar reports that by the 1950s, bootleg mining was commonly practiced around to the run, as the Bast Colliery, the big employer of the patch, had already closed. Actually, in the coal region, he says that the Great Depression of 1929 had actually begun years earlier, as many families had come to rely on relief, which we know as welfare, as King Coal fell from his throne. That means that the blasting was being performed by nearby bootleggers so we kids ducked. And all turned out well, I must tell you, although I never quite understood how our loving mother could leave us to face such peril without draping some sort of protective veil over our heads. My mother always said a lot of prayers, though, and saintly statues strewn throughout the household would surely take the hit. So we remained safe after all. Thanks, Mom. Okay, Bodie, let's take a look over to silence. We're gonna go. This one is Bearcat Rides the 9 o'clock Flyer. And just in the interest of time, I'm just gonna tell you a bit about that. My one uncle, Uncle Harry Kelly, was a funny, wonderful storyteller, and his favorite story was to talk about Bearcat and the night he met his fate as the 9 o'clock Flyer ran by his home. But save that for a reading, because we're going to go right to the next one, which is called Silent Snow. And Silent Snow is a painting that I created. I'm trying to find the year here. Let's see. Back in 2013. I forget, we're in the 20s these years. 2013, I had hurt my leg, so I had to stay in the doors for a couple of months in the winter. But I did manage to hobble out one snowy day and took a picture of the statue that sits at the down in Ashland called Mother's Memorial. And I created this piece trying to honor our mothers and honor the painting. And some good ideas come out of this. And I want you to keep in the back of your head as you go through these stories and look at these paintings. These people knew something that we need to get in touch with. They knew how to maintain life, to keep going, even when things got tough. They understood hope. Silent Snow. Every son and daughter of Ashland knows the Mother's Memorial quite well. She represents a sort of grandmotherly figure to many of us as she sits quietly at the top of Huffman Boulevard. Erected in 1938, the statue was sculpted in New York by Julius Lester, using the painting known as Whistler's Mother to guide his hands. The dedication at the base of the piece reads as follows: "A mother is the holiest thing alive." I painted many versions of this landmark, but I consider Silent Snow one of my better efforts. Visiting her throughout the various times of the year, I've often been struck with a sense of serenity as I look upon her stoic figure. Sitting on the stone staircase that lies above, I've pondered all the souls who walked past this presence throughout each generation, giving her a nod as they went about their daily affairs. Without realizing it, Mother served as a constant in their lives, silent and strong, like them. After looking through Almost Touching, my first book, local poet Harry Humes wrote me a very kind note. The Gerardville native described how this painting took him back to his younger days, hitching rides to and from Berry's Grove, standing with his thumb out, looking up at the statue, looking up at Mother, and getting lost in the thoughts she evoked. And I suppose that's part of the purpose of public art, to stimulate our minds and our hearts, and to remember. Today, sadly, something akin to urban blight is ravishing our hometown as well as neighboring communities. It hurts each time we witness another fire burning down a portion of a block. Familiar neighborhoods, once overflowing with families, now sit vacant as the weeds grow and the sidewalks crack. In truth, the future of our town looks pretty bleak, but Mother still rests in her chair, keeping vigil over our little village, always and forever, even in the silent snow. Can a poet save us? Okay, buddy, let's go to the next one, which is the interloper. There we go. Now, back in 2020, it was right after COVID was starting, just exactly then, March 13th, March 14th. I went out to Gerardville's, we called it Wayne's Bar, Wayne's Pub, or the Hibernian House, and I took a picture of the crowd. It was a little thinner because of COVID coming, but I changed the shapes and changed the outfits, but I kept the bar pretty much the same because supposedly the Waynes and the Kehoes have not really altered the shape of it. So let me tell you about the interloper, which is going to take us to the Molly Maguire story because this is Jack Kehoe's pub. Although I had heard about economic hardship and overt prejudice since early childhood, I had only heard about the Molly Maguires during my senior year at Cardinal Brennan High School. Tom Barrett spoke to the assembly about his new book, The Mollys Were Men. Once home, I asked Mom if she knew anything about the Molly Maguires, and she reported having heard that they were just a group of troublemakers. Apparently, such a belief was held by many Irish Catholics. And it's only in recent times that the extent of the widespread official corruption of once powerful men has come to light, and the Mollys now appear more the victims than the villains. In his memoir, Big Mine Run, Professor Bobinich cites Judge John P. Lavell's assessment, and here's the quote. He says, historians feel that the Molly Maguire trials were a surrender of state sovereignty. A private corporation initiated the investigation through a private detective agency. A private police force arrested the alleged offenders. And private attorneys for the coal companies prosecuted them. The state provided only the courtroom and the gallows. In spite of, or perhaps owing to, their public executions, some regard the Mollys as being instrumental in the support of trade unions that provided safer working conditions and fairer wages for the miners. Considering the McCormicks, my family, settled within easy walking distance of Jack Kehoe's pub in Gerardville, Pennsylvania, I'd love to be able to sit down with one of my great uncles and my grandfather, find out what they knew, what it was like, what was going on. During my recent research, the first date I found that mentioned the Molly Maguires was 1875. As previously stated, my great-grandparents' family settled in nearby Holmesville just the year before. Bobinich reports that in 1877, the miners only received about $1.65 for a day's work and were forced to endure, and I quote, deplorable, unsafe conditions. Soon, my grandfather Pat had joined his father and older brothers aboard the industrial machine. The 1880 census listed the 13-year-old as a minor. No doubt, the guys knew about this group, and I suspect some others regarded these Irish laborers as potential members, allegedly provoking violence and fear within the local mining community. Did my ancestors participate in this secret society? We'll never know. But I'm going to use my imagination, and I'm going to honor the memory of these brave individuals who fought for better wages and safer working environment for themselves and for their brothers in the mines. I've visited Wayne's Bar often, better known as the Hibernian House or Jack Kehoe's place, many times. Joe Wayne, the proprietor, while I was a young man, is Jack's great-grandson, as I believe his family still runs the place. As St. Patrick's Day approached about 3 years ago, I dared to visit just before COVID came. Taking photographs of the bar room, I referenced the crowded scene as I laid out this piece. Naturally, the decor has been replaced, updated throughout the decades, but I learned that the family has kept the actual bar of this former hotel bar room in its original condition. After attending a couple of presentations about the Molly Maguires at local historical societies and reading Jackie Fowler's book about Jack, the almost true story of the Molly Maguires, I began constructing what I call the interloper, this picture. The guy coming through the door, that's McFarland. That's Pinkerton's spy. I sought to portray a hint of the fear and distrust that must have shuddered through the Hibernian house after word of Pinkerton's spy's intrusion became known. On December 18th, 1878, despite his pleas of innocence, Jack Kehoe was hanged during a public execution in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, along with other friends. In 1979, 101 years after the hanging, Governor Milton Schaap officially pardoned John Kehoe. As Fowler insightfully comments in her prologue, future generations may not know all the details that surrounded the Mollies, but, and I quote, heightened emotions remain imprinted on them. In my painting, I tried to capture that uncertainty, the distrust, the fear that must have infiltrated every corner of the region after Mr. Gowan had placed his spy within the mining community. In my lifetime, I have been aware that some of my fellow citizens didn't welcome the Irish. Now I have a better understanding of the origins of such sentiments. Hopefully, we will welcome current immigrants with more grace, lessening their apprehensions as they strive to build their lives in this new land. Okay, Bodie, let's take a ride over there to taking the train to Nana Cook's. Here we are. And just so you know, folks, this is one of those, if you're creating artwork, sometimes it becomes real fun. And on this particular day, when I was creating this piece, it was an absolute joy. I was here in the kitchen where I'm sitting now, and I painted in the sky and drew some of the shapes in. And I was surrounded by pieces of old watercolors I had done that didn't work out so good. And this red bird kept calling to be in the picture. I thought, oh no, I don't need a red bird in this picture. It doesn't make any sense. But as I continued to work, things evolved. So let me tell you how this piece came into being. Taking the Track to Nana Cook's, painted in 2023. It's a watercolor collage. It danced to life on my workspace like a Disney animation, forming a scene for the big screen. After putting down my first glaze and considering my next move, I noticed a big red bird shape stacked within an acetate envelope filled with pieces of abandoned watercolors. I thought about cutting out or drawing in the sun, but this birdie continued to chirp as I moved ahead. Later on, after walking out front to check my mail, I noticed some cool shavings lying around the yard. It was a windy day, and the neighbor's farm had had corn on it, but it had been taken down, and now there were these little pieces all around my grass. I picked up as much as I could carry. This watercolor was going to turn into a collage. Taking the Tracks to Nana Cook's begins with this memory. Resting near the bottom of town, the bottom of Ashland, the Ashland Railroad Station sat just beyond the current site of Boyer's IGA. We used to love playing in the area of the old breaker and the adjacent buildings that still stood there in the 1950s. Lots of train tracks created an allure as well. So a kid had to pay attention to the rails as he balanced his way across the lines. Sitting down or skiing down culm banks, by the way, if you look behind those red buildings to the right, coming down those, they were black culm banks. That was fun. And we did it regularly, but it must have ceased to amuse because we made the decision, let's take a hike to Gerardville to visit Johnny and Philip's Nana. Repeatedly warned to stay off the roads, Charles and Billy Goff and I accompanied the Lavells as we hiked the tracks, the railroad tracks, to Mrs. Lavelle's family homestead. In no time, we crowded onto Mrs. Winifred Cook's side porch, and Johnny called through the screen door, "Nana." Soon, wee little Nana Cook stepped out in all her sweetness, and she was sweet, looking amused as we described our most recent sojourn. What I recall most vividly, though, 72 years old, say 60 years later, is the smell of baking, baked bread, baked cookies. Smelled so good. Johnny and Philip chatted a bit with Nana, and we gathered our stuff and started heading back to town. The trek home seemed more lengthy and heavy, since our spirits no longer lifted our steps. Still, getting there had been worth it. And we'd made it all the way to another town, and we didn't even cross Center Street. So there you go, Ma. Okay, buddy, let's take a walk over to Centralia now. And I noticed earlier, I saw one of our Zoom audience members is Professor Philip Mosley, and I'm going to talk about him a little bit with this painting, because after reading his book and hearing him speak, I had to get down to business with Centralia, a topic that was in my head for a long time, but I had yet to paint. So I created this piece, and I call it Centralia Once. In 2023, upon reading Philip Mosley's Telling of the Anthracite, a Pennsylvania post-history, I read his conclusion that 1960 marks the end of the coal boom. In the past, I had heard either 1930 or 1950. He set my artwork as continuing in the folk tradition of Wyso, that's W-Y-S-O, and Jack Savitsky, an honor I happily embraced. His words gave me a better idea of where my paintings fit. After I'd been painting for a couple of years, people started asking me to describe my style. I didn't know the correct words. I settled on modern primitive because I noted aspects of each school in my watercolors. Nowadays, I simply say my work is contemporary. Never having conceived of myself as a coal region painter, drawn upon images of my fertile childhood guided my initial steps. Now, Professor Mosley's detailed study of the area reminded me it was time to visit the neighboring community of Centralia, searching for markers as I walked through her gravesite. As Centralia once lived just next door, I knew her tragic tale all too well, and I sought to honor my friend's legacy, not sensationalize its doom. Dear friends, like the McGinleys and the Canes, hailed from there. The remarkably gifted Kane family's home rested just atop the hill, down and across from St. Ignatius Roman Catholic Church. Often, as I delivered the family's food order from Kelly Brothers' store, my uncle's store, Mother Mary Kane would greet me from her comfortable easy chair as I stepped into their home. That was Aunt Teresa's sister. Now, on this frigid January day, a couple years back, trying to picture their former front porch and feel some of their joy, I looked at what I saw. This home that once burst with energy and such love-filled harmonies. All the Canes could sing, by the way. On that day, I could only hear the cold winter wind sighing through the naked trees. I turned. I'm standing on their front porch or where it had been. Looked downhill. Took a few more pictures. The main intersection below, suggesting a rather twisted crucifix, hinted at my composition, and I added the Assumption of the Blessed Mary Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, one of the few remaining structures that almost shouted from the opposite hillside to be included. Now look at the painting, like the blue streak there, that's the road heading toward Aristus, and it's crossed by the road that goes from Centralia over toward Mount Carmel. So that suggestion of a cross is there. Then the church, which is still standing, kind of jumps through the otherwise dire scene. And I added pieces of the wood I had found in the yard. And I can remember walking through Centralia when it was burning, looking down on the ground, and I would see big rocks and fallen trees lying around. And then up top, for some, I don't know why I did this, but I did it. I broke things and just put a little image of the houses that were once there in a happier time when we were kids. Across the top of the piece, I sketched in some fragmentary neighborhoods we knew in a gentler era. Below, I suggested the mine fire's wrath, with cracking foundations and leaking fumes rising to the paths upon which the locals marked their days. Sometimes this palpable local history gathers steam, and I shudder at the thought of our future. But as Mary Kane used to say in times of trouble, be strong, Bobby, be strong. We must. Okay, Bodie, we're going to go to women's work next. There we are. Now, even titling this piece, I can remember when I was trying to figure out how to title this piece. It's a watercolor collage, once again, women's work. With the political correctness out there today, I was a little bit shy about that, but I went, no, when we were kids, women's work was what we're talking about. So let me explain and follow with me, and we'll see what happens. Growing up in the 1950s and 60s, women's work primarily referred to household duties, cooking, scrubbing, dusting, washing, ironing, and such. Dads went to work while moms kept house. Mothers played a larger role in their children's daily activities, including school-related topics such as homework, studying for tests, and other projects. Fathers may have brought home the bacon, but mom fried it. I remember once having a talk with my mom about the more extensive demands her own mother would have endured raising her 9 children in the 1920s and 30s. My mother described my grandmother's early rise to bake the bread needed for her husband's work and her children going to school. I think she said 3 in the morning, but I can't believe anybody get up at 3 in the morning, but I think she said she did. Keeping the family in clean clothes required our grandmothers and great-grandmothers to utilize such implements as scrub boards and rolling boards rather. Something to flex the fibers, removing the dirt from the fabric. According to the lecturer, Robert Lee, numerous other devices invented back then, such like washing skates and dashers, suggested the intricacy needed to keep the family looking and smelling presentable. Monday, wash day. Tuesday, ironing day. Then Wednesday was reserved for mending, sewing buttons, socks, and other clothing that needed attention. All this required 15 to 20 trips to the well to fill up the pots, then boil the water on the pot-bellied stove. And after washing and rinsing, it was time to dry. Well, a pivotal invention came along, the wringer. This allowed women more time to do their other chores and lessened the strain on their arm muscles. At my dad's house, back out in Big Mine Run, I remember playing with the wringer that sat atop an old-fashioned washing machine found on their back porch. It was fun. Left there from the 30s and 40s, I suppose. I think it ran manually because it sat on the enclosed back porch, and I remember, turning the thing and running a shirt through it. It was just something for a kid to play with, and it was a way to make a shirt drier than it had been. A more familiar option is one that we saw regularly, which was following mom out when she was hanging the clothes on a line outside. I vividly recollect. Now, this is a summer scene that you're looking at here, but I've painted a winter version of this as well. And in the winter version, this is where the story fits in. I was standing high, almost taller than my mom, because the snow was holding me up. It had somehow frozen over top. As we were walking into the yard, it gave way and I sank up to my chest. How did these women do it each and every day, week after week, month after month, year after year? Little wonder I have always been in awe of the fairer sex. Today, and this is where I honor my family once again, as I hope you will honor your families, I am graced to be connected to strong and steady female spirits who continue to nurture their children, their grandchildren, and their spouses. And they will still put something down, even when they're busy, if they have to help a family member or a friend. As for professions, my mom, Nana, would burst with pride witnessing her little girls who have gained prominence in the medical, legal, educational, and business fields. These kids also managed to find the time to drive their own kids to soccer games and ballet classes. Well, let's credit the dads too for the teamwork. Their responsibilities have truly expanded throughout the last 50 years. Another one of mom's final remarks. Things change. Always have, always will, Bobby. Things change. I think she was advising us, friends, to stay alert, to stay on our toes. She possessed such clarity and an admirable generosity of spirit. My life has been replete with blessed and beautiful female spirits, forever grateful, I must say. Good night, ladies. Now we turn over to work, Bodhi. Work is not one more. There we go. This painting, which I call work, depicts a drag line, which my nephew works on. And an odd thing, when I was talking at the Anthracite Fields concert up there in Susquehanna, somebody asked about the amount of people who go to the work site to the drag line. And I think my answer would have to be one or two. And apparently that is drastically different from back in the day when hundreds of men worked at so many different mines. So that brought to question in my mind, what's going to happen to work? So I started sketching this painting, this acrylic, and the clouds started to almost suggest little birds. So I started adding some ravens or crows into the scene. because I wanted to suggest some of the ominous feelings that I sometimes get about work. And now I'm getting into the modern days and I'm starting to feel a little anxiety. This was painted in 2023. So let me read to you about work. Whenever I find myself thinking about the concept of work, I'm reminded of the many thoughtful discussions of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. My students and I used to share when I served as an English teacher at the Blue Mountain High School. Marlowe, the protagonist, struggles to endure the burgeoning madness that eats away at Kurtz and the rest of the company men, who had traveled from Belgium to the Congo in the 19th century seeking to make a fortune. Marlowe manages to stave off the surrounding chaos by focusing on the task at hand, replacing rivets in order to rescue the mysterious Mr. Kurtz upriver. Thus, Marlowe survives because his work sustains him. Without it, he might have fallen prey to the lure of greed and lust for power, like Kurtz and the other company men. How does any of this relate to us? As citizens of the 21st century, we have been surrounded by mounting job losses, many owing to the expanding application of technology. For decades, we've grown increasingly aware that lifelong careers at a single enterprise are becoming a thing of the past. Machines have replaced the need for people to complete their tasks. With no occupation and little means of support, what will become of our blue-collar workers? My dad was a blue-collar worker. What's going to happen to them? How will they and their families survive? The very definition of what it means to work continues to evolve. How will modern men and women stave off chaos like Marlowe? As we step into the future, my friends, our efforts must aim to lift the lot of the common man, provide ease for the laborer and his or her family after an honest day's work, and sustain these families and individuals that make up our community. Thankfully, our founding fathers have left us a blueprint in the form of the U.S. Constitution. Like Marlowe, we are sailing upriver, navigating through a stream of rushing currents. Sometimes the waters will rage, so we can expect some turbulence. But remember, this is America. This is why Patrick and his brothers came here. We must remain steadfast, like Marlowe, and focus our efforts on the work at hand. Look up. Godspeed. Okay, now we're going to go to the final piece, which I will be picking up. By the way, this piece is called Pat Stood on Slag, and I was really happy and honored because this year it was included at the Art of the State 2024 exhibit, and that was just closed this past Sunday. So I have to go down tomorrow and pick it up in Harrisburg. And this is a piece I started painting. A neighbor had provided some roofing material from his barn. And what I loved about this material is that the old barn, and it's a rusty old barn right down the road, had been roofed with these metal sheets in 1914. It is now 2016, 2017. He was getting a new roof over 100 years later. Want some panels? I said, absolutely. So as I painted this, and just take a minute and look at the picture, the parts that down at the bottom, they kind of suggested to me coal cars. So I painted them as such and added some coal at the top. And then I created some slag heaps up behind them. And if you look way up there, and it's to the middle, to the right a little bit in the middle, there's a little guy standing there. And let me tell you about him and the pieces of the collage that run across the top. Let me tell you about this story. Pat stood on slag. Pat, it's my grandfather, Pat. Unable to find a photograph of my maternal grandfather, who had died at the age of 77. Started work at 12, lived to be 77. Who can figure? A few years before my birth, in 1952, I adopted a figure of a breaker boy pictured between two adult miners standing near a colliery not far from his home. Like his brothers, Pat began working in the mines by age 13, according to the 1880 U.S. Census record. During the years since his family's 1874 arrival, he appears to have attended a local school. A few decades later, Patrick's signature on his son Donald's death certificate reveals a competent yet shaky hand. He had learned to read and write, and he went to work in the mines. Pat stood on slag, emerged as my first attempt to paint Black Desert Heroes shifted gears. And by the way, if you can get over to Hazleton Sunday, come and see me. I'm going to be talking about these things, and all these paintings are there, at least half of them, because half of them are sold. But the one I'm mentioning is there, Black Desert Heroes. Shifted gears. Instead of portraying the customary path up to the woods my childhood friends and I used to trek when we were kids, I looked at that boy miner's face, and I imagined him to be my young grandpa. And I lifted him out of the Girardville Historical Society's picture, and I placed him right there in the middle of my hill. The century-old metal roofing sheet on which I was painting contributed to the formation of the scene, suggesting the placement of buildings, machinery, and the coal-filled train cars that run along the bottom edges. Young Patrick can be detected standing amidst the heaps of slag that would have surrounded his family home in Holmesville. In his memoir, Big Mine Run, Professor Bobinich, contemporary of my dad, reports that the Bast Colliery, located a quarter-mile west of the run, served as a workplace for many locals. I'm quoting now. By 1928, the total shipments of coal from the Bast Colliery was over 9.5 million tons. However, only 6 years later, in the fall of 1934, the Bast Colliery closed down. I wanted the lad's figure to blend in with the coal, the calm, the black dust. I positioned the boy atop a little hill, juxtaposing his diminutive stature amidst the monstrous, mountainous enterprise, seeking to convey some wee portion of his strength and fortitude. As a child, I played on such refuse, while Patrick Henry McCormick and his peers went to work for the day until the work went away. Such was the lot of immigrants and their children and their grandchildren. Look at the life Patrick lived. Now look at the lives we live. America works. Thank you, Grandfather Pat. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Virginia. And I thank all those who stood on slag before our arrival. You have made our passage that much easier. Thank you. So that's the work I've done. Of course, there's much more in it. But if you are interested in picking up a book, here's the information that Bodie's provided. He said perhaps you can take a screenshot of this. It lists the title, Reclamation from Coal Dust to Hope. The exhibit is going on right now at the Hayden Family Center for the Arts, the Hazleton Art League, 31 West Broad Street in Hazleton. And I would check their website for hours because they differ a bit day to day. On this coming Sunday, January 12th, from 1 to 3, I'll be up there talking and signing books. You can purchase a book with cash, check, PayPal, or Venmo that day, or you can get in touch with me via mail, email, and order a book from me, and I'll ship it to you. It costs a little bit to ship because I want to keep them protected. I made sure these books are a little bit expensive, and I made them top quality because I want them to be around for our grandchildren, to let them know that this time in history sometimes looks a little bleak in pictures, but it was pretty wonderful too. So it's a coffee table style book. I don't know if you can see it here because I don't know how to do this. Here you go. And it sells for $60. And I would be most honored if you would consider buying one for your children and grandchildren. So thank you so very much for being with us today. And if you have any questions, I'm prepared to answer. Thank you.
And if anyone has questions, feel free to turn off, unmute your mic and turn off your camera, or turn on your camera, and speak right to Bob. And I will try and put the information about his book and upcoming talk in Hazleton in the chat.
Thank you. Well, I think they all sound pretty quiet, so maybe they're trying to get warm like I am too. So
I wanted to
Keith?
say, all of them were stunning pieces. I really appreciated the mother painting. I thought that was with the cardinals all around. I thought that was
Oh, thank you.
absolutely beautiful. I'd love to come visit
Thank
that someday.
Thank you.
And I also noticed, and I've listened to it and watched it as well. I believe it was back in 2019, but you brought up the oratory about the anthracite fields. What was her name
Yeah.
again? Julia, was it?
Julia Wolf, yes.
Wolf.
Yeah, and she's from Pennsylvania originally, down around where you're at now, the Philadelphia suburbs. But then she moved to New York, and she's like the leading avant-garde music composer right now. And what's just stunning to me, Kelly, is that how she was able to grasp all that went on in our mining communities and put it into one magnificent piece, which is so moving. But she worked in the music and the fun as well. So what a beautiful artist this lady is. And she won a Pulitzer Prize for it, which made me really proud, and it should make all people in the anthracite proud.
Sure.
That someone
It was
took the time to
captivating.
do it.
And
It
I'm going to
was.
look it up again and rewatch that because it was
Oh,
a joy
absolutely.
to watch. It was a joy. But
It
thank
really
you so
was.
much for your time, and you are so talented and you are
Oh,
so
thank you.
interesting. We appreciate the stories you brought to us. It means a lot.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I'm a bit of a nut, just so you know, but that goes with the territory. You know. Thank you.
Well,
No
great.
words from Mr. Mosley. I've heard Mr. Mosley's name around.
I saw his face a while ago, but I don't know. Oh, there he is.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, hello, that's me. Hi.
Hello, Professor Mosley. How are you today?
Professor.
I'm doing well, thanks, Bob. Yeah,
Wonderful.
that was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here, my friend. I'm greatly honored by you. By the way, my new book has a preface written by this man, which is just brilliant. And I think you should buy it just because he wrote the preface. So
No, I beg to differ. I think you should buy it because of the quality of Bob's writing and his paintings, which are just they never cease to just really stir my juices in terms of my
Ooh,
interest in history and the anthracite region and so on. This book is really terrific.
thank you so very much, Dr. Mosley. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate
Thank
you.
you, Bodie. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. And everyone else, I put the link to the rest of the Mining History Month programs, so feel free to check that out. We've got lots of things going on. We'll have several programs at Eckley, several at the Anthracite Heritage Museum, including the Knox Mine program on the 18th. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about our upcoming trip to the UK, Industrial Heritage Tour of the UK, sponsored by the museum. So be sure to tune in for that. And anyway, thanks again, everyone. I appreciate you coming out tonight. We had a great turnout. And Bob, I look forward to seeing more of your paintings coming up.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks
night,
so
all.
much, gentlemen. Thank you. Have a good night and happy Anthracite Heritage Month, right?
That's
Absolutely.
right. Yes.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.